once you carry out that and present it as a hyper-nationalist solution to conflict, then you are bound to do something bigger this time. So there is this tremendous public pressure led by the intellectually bankrupt Indian elite class that now there should be something which is even bigger. And it's so grotesque that it's not just the far right media, but even the left of center media, even left of center alternative media, even people who would be otherwise critiques of Hindu nationalism. They are jumping on this bandwagon. Diplomats, hardline retired military officers, right-wing journalists, centrists, they are the spokesperson and they are building up this narrative. And of course, there is a massive internal pressure on the Hindu nationalist government because their constituency is hyper-nationalist.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking to Jyotishman Mudiar, the host of the very successful YouTube channel India and Global Left. Jyotishman has been producing great content over there for many years already, so I highly recommend you all check it out right after this video. For instance, he did recently an interview with John Mearsheimer that is very enlightening for myself on the way Mr. Mearsheimer sees things. And I thank you, Jyotishman, for doing that. And I'm very happy to have you back on this show as well.
Thank you so much for having me on.
It's you've been meeting a lot of people, and especially that Mearsheimer video has been fantastic to me. We'll talk about that in just a second, but I would like to start because you are Indian originally, although currently you're
I am
studying
an
abroad.
Indian. I hold an Indian citizenship.
Sorry, not originally. Yeah, you hold Indian citizenship, although you're currently.
I've never had a different citizenship.
Yeah, sorry, I phrased this badly, but I want to ask
Okay.
you about India and Pakistan. Could you tell us what's happening at the moment and what's going on between these two countries?
That's a the tragedy is we don't know. And why we don't know is because if you look at the media on both sides of the border, the Pakistan side and the Indian side, you get two different pictures which do not come together at all. It reminds me of Mark Bloch's A Historian's Craft, where he says that during times of war, do not believe anything that the media tells you.
Mhm.
So if you look at the Indian media, the story goes like this: at Pahalgam in the Kashmir controlled by India, there was a terror attack that killed 26, mostly tourists and Hindus, it turns out. And the story is that it was created at the behest of the Pakistani establishment. That's the Indian narrative. And it was meant to target Hindus in particular. There were reports that initially resistance front, a militant or terrorist, pick your side as you define it, they had owned it, but later it was told that they backed out. And now there is no one who is owning it up. But the Indian narrative is that it was done by these terror operatives that operate from Pakistan, and the Pakistan establishment is directly in collaboration with that. That's the Indian narrative. Now, if you look at the Pakistan media, it's completely the opposite. Pakistan says that there is no evidence the Indian government has been able to present about not just our involvement, which is just ridiculous, but even carried out by any organization that operates from Pakistan. In fact, they have gone on to say that it is most likely an Indian false flag operation done because there are elections coming in India. And they have been now insisting that a commission of inquiry should be set up under international leadership. I mean, you can decide who that would be, but that should be the way forward, and there shouldn't be an escalation or the two nuclear countries going at war because of this, which has been the Indian media. Sadly, even the liberals and the left of center, the so-called progressive media, they have been jumping on this bandwagon that there is no other way out but to teach a lesson to the Pakistani establishment, which meant just literally going into war. And there are now talks about going out of the Indus Water Treaty, which was signed in 1960. It was a river water sharing treaty that has been extremely critical and vital to the lower riparian states in Pakistan. And Indian government is now talking about going back on it. Now, I think the critical point to understand here is that this is happening at the backdrop of a total double standard on the elites on both sides. So, if you look at the Indian side, uh, the Kashmir that India controls, there is a very extensive literature on the enormous repression by extrajudicial measures, forced disappearance, demolitions of jobs through counter-terrorist operations, and so on and so forth, which has meant a brutal repression of Kashmiri aspiration in that part of the Kashmir. And what the Pakistani elites do, which includes the media, the intelligentsia, the Pakistani intelligence, government, military, and so on, they consider it as part of a resistance for freedom and liberation of Kashmir, which you can say is an arguable and a reasonable case. The problem, however, is that when it comes to Balochistan and the Fatah area, the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan, they have the same issues. These are Pashtun dominated areas, and they have similar aspirations of seceding from Pakistan. And these nationalist movements there are considered by the Pakistan state as terror groups. And so the Balochistan Liberation Army, Balochistan National Army, or Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, these are called terror groups, and one can argue that they can be defined as terror groups because they constantly rely on terror methods. Um, uh, and on the Indian side, including people at the national security apparatus and so on, they would say that we should do something about these areas in liberating them, in breaking them, Pakistan. So there is this massive double standard in the elites on both sides. When it comes to their territories where they should downscale their repression, they should leave these areas to the people of these areas, they completely toe a nationalist lines. And they say that it is the other side that is just fomenting terror here, uh, which may or may not be the case. We don't know at all. I mean, there are evidence on both sides. We don't know, but which is definitely the case is that these areas have been repressed. There have been several forms of repressions, and there is a very extensive body of literature. And I think it is this backdrop that defines more or less the tension between India and Pakistan. And so what is true and what is false have become anybody's guess. I mean, you don't know what is going on in a way. I mean, we do know about the repressive aspects. We don't do know about facts, but we basically don't know much about the involvement of each other, and that's where we are.
So the only thing that is sure is that we had this terrorist attack, that we had people dying, and both sides are blaming others. Do you see any hope in the United Nations or like outside actors trying to help to calm down these animosities and actually do this inquiry that is now needed?
Yes, before that, I should also say that yes, it is definitely true that the terror attack has killed 26 people at Pahalgam. But it is also true that Pakistan has been facing several terror attacks. In fact, Pakistan is ranked number two in terms of terror attacks by IEP that studies sort of provides us the global terrorism index. And in 2024, there were roughly 1,100 terror attacks in Pakistan. Half of them is by Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is a Pashtun group separate from the Afghan Taliban, but have very close connections with that. They have their aspirations of liberating the Pashtun areas away from Pakistan. And the Indian state is accused of fomenting troubles there. So what I want to add is that let's not have this overreaction about one extremely heinous terror attack, because there are many more terror attacks on the other side as well. And I am not saying that the Indian establishment is definitely involved, but there are multiple evidence shown by the Pakistani side about its involvement. So the point is that they should pull back. Both the intelligence agencies and the military on both sides should pull back, pull away from these areas, and let autonomy to flourish, and then talk to each other. And that relates to your question. Any external entity, whether it's the United Nations, whether it's other countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, or any country for that matter, that can be effective only if the two sides are willing to talk to each other. Only if the two sides say that, look, this has been a failed strategy. We have done it for 85, 75, more than 75 years since the horrible partition or tragic partition in 1947, when the British was overthrown from the Indian subcontinent. We have tried this for many decades. It hasn't worked. It is not in the interest of people on both sides of the divide. And let's just withdraw from that. If that is the case, then these negotiations can work. The World Bank negotiated Indus Water Treaty works only if both the countries decide to obey it. Right now, of course, India doesn't have the technological capacity to divert a lot of water, but it says that it would build rapidly, and that is and would be a humanitarian and ecological disaster. I mean, Noam Chomsky spent a lot of time towards his fag end of life warning us against two severe catastrophes. One is nuclear, the other is ecological and environmental. And this flashpoint has both. India and Pakistan are two heavily armed nuclear states, and it can spiral out of control. I mean, we have an extensive literature on the Cuban Missile Crisis, and this was just by miracle that we survived. And so that's one side of it. The other side is this: the Himalayan belt is extremely ecologically sensitive. There are multiple floods, multiple droughts, and global warming is making these cycles even more erratic. And if you are to build enormous dams over there to deflect water, it will have tremendous impact, not just in creating droughts in the lower riparian areas, but also across the upstreams. And so to give a short answer to your question is that any negotiation is welcome, and a third party involvement can be there, given India and Pakistan both want to participate. And on this front, I think at this moment in history, it is the Indian side that seems to be unwilling to talk to, and it is the Pakistani side that has been sending signals after signals about talking to.
Why is it that the Pakistani-Indian border seems, at least to me, from what I hear, and I don't hear everything, but what arrives at my point is that the Indian-Pakistani border is highly violent and volatile, and India also has border disputes with China, and they're also problematic, but they're less violent, at least from what I see. Why that difference?
Yeah, first of all, these are different histories. India and Pakistan, the partition was one of the most violent moment of world history. 1 million people were butchered on either side, and 10 million people were displaced. And that led to the partition of Punjab, which is shared by India and Pakistan. So that became two halves. But Kashmir was heavily became a disputed territories. And it was divided between India and Pakistan again. But there was no final resolution to it. So the northwestern half of it, which is called sometimes the Azad Kashmir or Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and the other half, which is also called as Indian occupied Kashmir, or Indians would like to call it just Kashmir, they have been separated by a line of control that is heavily militarized. I mean, about the estimates are about 1 million army guard this line of control and the neighboring region, and it is equally militarized on the other side. I don't have the exact number on the other side, but it is the most militarized zone of in the world. And there have been repeated wars, 1948 major war, 1965 major war, 1971 major war, 1991 wars, and there are multiple incidents between them. And so that remains a very heavily armed border. India-China border story is completely different. In China was never the centerpiece of Indian nationalism. India was never the centerpiece of Chinese nationalism. It just happened that the Brits had a huge empire in the subcontinent, and they had a unequal relationship with Tibet. And when the empire broke down, the Indian state inherited those vaguely defined borders that the British Empire unilaterally defined as their borders. Of course, the Chinese side contests these some of these territories, and it's a long line. It's 4,000 kilometers. It's a long line, but it is not. Uh, uh, it is not part of a war. It is part of resolving a border, which was because there was an empire which break down, and you need readjustments and acceptance on both sides. So I think it's the different history. India and Pakistan were part of the same history, which broke down huge massacres, and that's not China and India. China and India were separate right from the beginning, and so that should be seen more as a border conflict. But India and Pakistan is much more ideological. It has a deeper history. That's the story.
Thank you for that clarification. The How do you see the current Modi government and the ruling elites in Pakistan, as where they what are their political motivations for to engage with the conflict as it stands today?
Yeah, I mean, there are hardliners in Pakistan as well, and their institutions behave differently. So if you look at the army, it would, of course, have to take a hardline position because it cannot come up as a soft institution. That's precisely vindicates their existence. But by and large, within the political establishment, going right up to Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif and the media, major media outlets like Dawn, Pakistani journalists, and others, which are very respected in general, they have been very outspoken about maintaining restraint, and I think that's very logical because Pakistan cannot afford to go into a war with India at the moment. Their economy is at a terrible state, and India is a much bigger power, and so that's just you know. Even if you go by realism or self-interest, that's a very logical argument. But yeah, within the elite media establishment, there is a much greater voice of restraint on the Pakistani side. But if you are talking about social media, if you are talking about much more low-level politics, religious groups, then of course there are all sorts of varieties. The story on the Indian side is that the Modi government represents the Hindu nationalists, and so they cannot even come up as a soft party, and given that there is the death of 26 tourists, so they are bound by their own politics, so they just can't back down. And there has been this series of things. There was this attack again in 2019 at Pathankot, and India decided to cross the border, and apparently they eliminated terror establishments across the borders. I mean, that was the story. Pakistani media says that that's not true. They just dropped it on the mountains and forests, but we don't know the truth, of course. But the thing is, once you carry out that and present it as a hyper nationalist solution to conflict, then you are bound to do something bigger this time. So there is this tremendous public pressure led by the intellectually bankrupt Indian elite class that now there should be something which is even bigger. And it's so grotesque that it's not just the far right media, but even the left of center media, even left of center alternative media, even people who would be otherwise critiques of Hindu nationalism. They are jumping on this bandwagon. Diplomats, hardline retired military officers, right-wing journalists, centrists, they are the spokesperson and they are building up this narrative. And of course, there is a massive internal pressure on the Hindu nationalist government because their constituency is hyper nationalist. So when they were unable to back down when it was the standoff with the Chinese, now it is Pakistan. It is even more, there is a greater asymmetry now in favor of India, which is as opposed to China. And it is a larger part of ideological nationalism. So you can back down. So that's where it is now.
Last question on this topic. Do you see the United States or any other external power other than Pakistan and India have any bearing on the situation, or is this purely internal?
The United States seem to have too much on its plates now. It's taking on Iran is dropping bombs in Yemen, actively participating in ethnic cleansing of not just Gaza, but the refugee area in West Bank. It is trying to negotiate a settlement with the Russians, but it is absolutely uncertain about its position on Ukraine. Domestically, it's in a severe mess. It's escalating the most severe trade embargo with China. The bond vigilantes are reacting extremely negatively to these. There is a domestic war, I would say, that has been unleashed on its people in the United States. So I think the United States, even if it would like to do something to appear to favor the Indians, because they need India to counterbalance China, which with whom they have decided to continue a prolonged war now in several ways. I don't think they are able to do something. So President Donald Trump said that the two countries are good enough to resolve this. That's where the United States is. Of course, also it's essential to remember that there has been a change in history. The United States was historically closer to Pakistan. In fact, the militancy at the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the northwest frontier provinces in Pakistan that we spoke about, it was the creation of the United States and the Saudi, where it created the Mujahideens, in which Pakistan became the active participants. Of course, decades later, they would come back and haunt them, and now they are fighting those offshoots of the militants in those border areas, which they had trained in the 1970s to fight the infidels, the Soviets and their allies in Afghanistan. But yeah, that's where the United States is. I don't think the United States should actively do anything, but behind closed door, it might do something, given it has a huge leverage both on Pakistan and increasingly it seems it has more influence on India. It might do something behind the door. I mean, there are reports that said that during the last standoff in 2019, 2020, the United States did play a role. I mean, there are media reports on that. I am not privy to them. So I don't know what's going on behind the door, but that's what is out there in the public.